It does benefit us and others to know where to go for assistance when we need it, and then to avail ourselves of those resources. So let me just talk about our experiences that everyone can relate to, everybody can understand. But then there are some other reasons that are especially prevalent in the African American community. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today, this first day of May, this beautiful day, to join me for this Journey in Truth service. I think I have a lot to go over, so hopefully it'll be something that'll be worthwhile for everybody. So we're going to get started with this video.
Yo, you need some help?
Don't worry about me.
Yo, there's no shame.
You don't know my family, man. My parents or brothers or sisters or cousins ever found out?
Dude, this weight's pretty heavy.
I just need some help, and I'll figure it out myself. Okay?
Sometimes you just need some help.
How many of you have seen this commercial on TV? Yeah? Some of you?
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, so it's obvious in this video that this person needs help, right? And they should be accepting of the help that has been offered to them. But how many of us do this same thing? We are in need of help, but we refuse to ask, to send that SOS, to shoot up that flare. And even when we do get offered that help, we refuse it. Well, this is what we're going to talk about today. Why we have a problem with sending that MayDay. Call and getting that help when we need it. And then why, when we finally get that help, we don't effectively use it. Not in a way that is to our greatest advantage. So there's another commercial out there where there's a gentleman who jumps out of a plane and his parachute doesn't work. And another parachutist comes and says, it's okay, we can do this together. And he stops and he says, no, it's okay. I don't want to ruin your experience. I mean, we see this type of thing all the time. In our lives and in the lives of others that we care about. The inability to ask for help or to accept help. So why do you think that we do that? Why do we not ask for help? Why do we not accept help? Any thoughts? Anybody? Just throw out any answers.
Shame.
Shame, definitely. What else?
Pride.
Pride. What else? Anybody else? Any thoughts on why we don't accept help? Marie? Fear, definitely. Stubbornness. Absolutely. Anybody else? Unworthiness. Ooh, that's a good one. Thank you. Those are all great answers on why we don't accept help. So we're going to talk about a few of those and maybe some others as well. Talking about why we don't ask for help. One of the reasons is we don't want to appear weak, right? We don't want to be a burden to anybody. We don't want to be perceived as needy or being that burden that makes us feel weak. It also takes vulnerability to be willing to open up and say that we need help. And some equate being vulnerable with being weak. But asking for help takes self-awareness and courage. It's important to know where our strengths lie and where they don't. Sometimes the most efficient way to proceed is to focus our efforts where they have the most impact and invite others to fill in the gaps according to their skills. This leads to teamwork and collaboration. To be vulnerable is to provide the opportunity to connect and pool resources and thereby being even stronger. So not wanting to appear weak, is one of the reasons. Another one is fear of rejection or judgment or shame. Being told no does not have to be awful, right? We do not have to weave a story and personalize the rejection or make it about us because we don't want to be ashamed of our situation or we think that we're being judged for needing help. But the truth most likely is that the person we chose to ask did not have the appropriate resources to help us at that time. It's best to accept the no as the answer to our request, not as a negation of who we are. But a no tells us not to waste time anymore and energy on asking that same person for help. It guides us closer to someone who can or will be able to say yes. And another one is the fear of being found out, right? That's like being exposed or fraud, what they call the Imposter Syndrome. It can coincide with all or nothing thinking or perfectionism, believing that if we don't know it all, we know next to nothing or come across as incompetent. So we work really hard to make sure people don't see us this way. In most roles in which we function, however, whether it's being a parent, an employee, a partner, a friend, we're not expected to know it all. There are always opportunities for us to learn and grow. It does not serve us to pretend that we have every answer. However, it does benefit us and others to know where to go for assistance when we need it, and then to avail ourselves of those resources. So what we just talked about are experiences that everyone can relate to, everybody can understand. But then there are some other reasons that are especially prevalent in the African American community, right? Why we don't ask for help. One is stigma in the Black community, right? Getting mental health and asking for help, that's not something that we do in our community, right? We're looked at as something wrong with us. It has to be an extreme reason for us to go ahead and seek out that help, right? It must be that somebody really has a serious mental illness, or somebody is on the street, or they're unemployed. It has to be a big reason to ask for help. Other than that, we don't do that. We're stigmatized for that within our own community. There's also the stigma of the Black community, right? We're looked at as always needing those resources, being always on welfare, looking for all those assistance programs, right? So we don't want to put any more of that shame or any more of that stigma on our community as a whole. So we won't seek out that help, right? Then there's this one that I suffered from a whole lot. You're a private person. How many of you grew up, Mama said, what stays in the house? What happens in the house, stay in the house, right? Nobody else needs to know your business, right? It really was ingrained in me. My mother even said, you don't need to have a best friend, because then they want to know your business. And then when they know your business, they want to tell your business, right? So it took me until I was an adult to even be able to call someone a best friend, because you got to be private and you keep it close to the vest, right? And then the last one is that we don't always have access to that help. Some of us don't have the insurance that we need in order to get the help, or if we do have insurance, it's not good. You maybe three therapy sessions for the year. What does that do, right? Or we can't find a therapist that understands us, that knows us, that looks like us, right? That can truly, truly be there to help us and support us through what happens. So there are many, many reasons why we can say that we do not ask for help, or that we have friends and family members who will not ask for help. The problem with most of these answers is that they are based in fear. Based in fear, based on limiting beliefs, and on error thinking. We routinely underestimate the willingness and ability for others to help. But the truth is that people actually help one another more often than you might think. In fact, one global Gallup survey found that 3 out of 4 Americans, 73%, helped a stranger in need within a given month. And that the majority of people in more than half of the 140 countries surveyed have done the same. And another study by an international team of anthropologists and linguists found that of the 1,057 everyday requests that happened, whether for some resource or some service or some support, almost 90% of them were immediately fulfilled. And some of these polls happened in New York, where we always think that people don't help each other. But they do. So it is not true that help is not out there. It is not true that you'll be stigmatized for the help that you ask. It reminds me of a quote by John Donne that was adapted by Phil Jackson, the Zen Meister. He said, "No man is an island. No man goes his way alone. What I put into the lives of others will come back into its own." So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to send out that MayDay. It will be answered. So let's talk about that word a little bit, MayDay. MayDay. From etymonline.com, MayDay is an international radio telephone distress call that started from 1923. It's apparently an English spelling of the French Madère, a shortening of Venez Madère, which means come help me, right? Come help me. Don't be afraid to ask for that help. But interestingly enough, there was already an international distress signal established for at least 10, 20 years before that. Anybody know what that might be? SOS. SOS. That was already established. So why the need for this one? Thank you for clarifying. SOS. So why the need for this one? Well, SOS originally was for the mariners and the Navy, because they use Morse code. So that ... was easy. You recognize it immediately that that was a signal for help. But with aviators, they don't use Morse code, right? They're talking over the radio. And so in saying SOS, sometimes they got confused and misheard. Are you saying S? Are you saying F? And when there's an emergency, having to clarify between S and F can mean the difference between life and death, right? So they went with MayDay. When you hear MayDay, MayDay, MayDay 3 times, they know that there's an emergency. Something is happening. Someone needs help somewhere. And it's been adapted not just in the aviation industry, with many industries abroad. Even the Navy, even the military, firefighters, they use MayDay. Why? So why am I telling you this? Because we need to understand that when we are asking for help, we need to be clear about what it is we need. Right? There can't be any muddled understanding about what kind of help you need, because then maybe you won't get the help at all, or you won't get the help that you need. So you want to be clear. It's the same thing. I've been working on my trainer certification for CPR, right? And when you're helping somebody, they tell you immediately that you just don't just say call 911. You look at a person in their eyes and their face and say, you call 911, for clarity, to make sure that you know who it is and that someone actually is going to do it. So make sure you are clear about the type of help that you need, what it is that you need. Asking for help does not devalue you in any way. It can enable you to advance, connect you meaningfully with others, bolster your productivity and ability to do things with greater ease, and better prepare you for your next challenge. It also gives you relief, as well as relieving the stress and anxiety and overwhelmment that you may be experiencing. And it can just be the help and support that you need to see the light at the end of the tunnel. As it says in Matthew 7, verses 7 to 8 and 11, the Lambda translation. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be open to you. For whoever asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door is open. If you don't open your mouth, if you don't open your mouth. But if you do, you never know what might come for you, what might be available to you. So, we've talked about why people don't ask for help or may need help. So what I want to talk about now is when we do ask for that help and when we do get that help and what we do with that help. And so there is a term called spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing. It was coined by John Wellwood in his book, Toward a Psychology of Awakening. It was in the 1980s, and he defined it as a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. In other words, it's using things like prayer, meditation, journaling, affirmation, church, etc. as band-aids to avoid or suppress our problems instead of using them as helpful tools in facing our challenges. The foundation of spiritual bypassing is basically avoidance and repression. And for some individuals, spiritually serves as a way to rise above or handle the shaky ground beneath. When spiritual practice is used to compensate for challenging traits such as low self-esteem, social isolation, or emotional issues, they corrupt the actual use of the spiritual practice. In other words, using these practices to cover up our limiting beliefs, error thinkings, and negative thought patterns seems like an easy way out, as opposed to working on the actual issues and origins or root causes of the challenging feelings and emotions. When taking the time to acknowledge the types of challenging emotions that are being bypassed, we learn to handle them. The most effective thing to do is acknowledge the emotion, sit with it, and honor it without repressing it. Basically, don't give it any power. This experience of a spiritual bypass is a defense mechanism that looks a lot prettier than other defenses, such as alcohol, drugs, and sex, but it serves the same purpose. Spiritual bypass shields us from the truth. It acts as a mask that we wear for ourselves that disconnects us from our feelings and helps us avoid the big picture, furthering affixing that mask from self-acceptance and self-love. It is more about checking out than checking in. And the difference is so subtle that we don't even know we are doing it sometimes. When we blindly say things like, everything happens for a reason. It was for the best. It was a blessing in disguise. Or thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. When we blindly say those things without understanding what that means, without recognizing that you still have to deal with the emotions and feelings behind those things. When we just say that to get people out of our face because we don't want to deal with the issue or the problem, right? When we feel uncomfortable when somebody else is having a challenge and we just say that so we can get them on their way and you can move on. Or when you're afraid to deal with those issues yourself. In some ways, we are now spiritually distracting ourselves from our feelings, but thinking that we're walking a healthy spiritual path. And when we do it to others, with the best of intentions, mind you, we are disregarding their feelings. With things like maybe following the death of a loved one, people tell surviving relatives that the deceased is in a better place. And it was all part of God's plan. Or when perhaps someone is angry and upset about something that someone else has done, and they try to share their feelings, and their friends will say, oh, just stop being so negative. Or perhaps a relative who regularly crosses boundaries and behaves in ways that are hurtful to other family members. And rather than confronting this behavior, those who have been harmed feel that they need to repress their anger and remain overly tolerant. How does that usually work out at the Thanksgiving dinner? Not well, I don't think. So there is a shadow side to almost every positive thing that we can do for ourselves, including our spiritual practices. All spiritual and psychological tools can be used in a willful way. For example, sometimes self-care is actually about taking care of ourselves, which is a great thing. Unplugging from too much work and plugging into more balance and harmony. But sometimes, under the guise of self-care, we're really just checking out, right? Denying what's happening and how scary it feels to show up for life, right? I just don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to roll over and go back to bed. Right? Instead of taking the covers off, opening the windows, getting some fresh air, going out in nature, clearing out the cobwebs, and getting clarity on what's really going on. Every tool for spiritual and psychological development has a purpose, and conversely, a place where it is of no help whatsoever. Nothing is a panacea, right? We know that not everything will cure every situation or will help every situation. But we often think that one pursuit will give us what we need in every area of life. We think that these practices should afford us freedom from the messiness of life, as though perfection is an attainable standard. We especially feel this way about spirituality. After all, isn't spiritual practice about accessing higher realms of consciousness and transcendence? Well, what is the purpose of spiritual practice? We need to remember that spiritual practice and emotional growth are not about achieving a particular quality of feeling good. Being on a spiritual journey isn't about getting to a particular place or cash and prizes and all that all the time. It is about being present in each and every moment. Whatever is happening, however it looks, what are you experiencing in the moment? And how can you be present to all of those feelings and all of those experiences without any of them defining you? This spiritual bypass is a slippery and conniving and is often disguised in robes of light. It can take a lot of what they say, ruthless self-honesty, to see through the lies that we're telling ourselves, that we've been conditioned to, that our ego wants us to believe, in order to prevent that spiritual bypass. So let's talk now a little bit about some of the causes of spiritual bypassing. Because it acts, again, like a form of a defense mechanism. It protects us from things that seem too painful to deal with. But this protection comes at a cost. Ignoring or avoiding the issues can make stress worse in the long term and make the problem more difficult to solve later on. Let me give you an example, just a quick one. I don't know if everybody has had this experience. I know I had it, especially when I was younger in college or right after college. You have bills and you have bill collectors and you avoid them. You don't want to talk to them. You don't want to deal with it, right? Until it gets to the point where you have no choice. It's in your face. You have to deal. You have to. You have to. You're letting it get so bad it's now to a critical or crisis stage. But really, if you would have just picked up the phone or answered the phone, they could have made some payment arrangements with you. They could have reduced the amount that you had to owe. It could have been a much simpler process that didn't have to reach a crisis stage. But with spiritual bypassing, we tend to avoid things until they come to a crisis state. Makes things worse. Now, while avoidance is a primary motivator behind this type of behavior, there are other factors that play a role in shaping it. The wellness and self-help culture, which often perpetuates ideas of toxic positivity and permanent optimism, is sometimes our driving force behind spiritual bypassing. It teaches people that they cannot be well or healthy unless they're able to rise above any negativity. The problem with this is that negative emotions are normal and often a sign that something needs to change, something is going on. Ignoring these signs can lead to worse problems down the road. Right? And because we don't think that we can do this, right, we begin to beat ourselves up, right? Why am I always unhappy? Why am I not figuring stuff out? Why is this not happening? It's me, it's my fault. They gave me all the tools, I don't know how to use it, or the tools don't work, so we give up on them. And what's worse about this new self-help culture, we look on Instagram and we see the self-help guru with the perfect life, right? They look good, they slim and trim, they know how to make the vegan meatballs, and, they go on to Cancun on the trips and everything, and you're like, well, I'm doing it. What's my problem, right? Not realizing that they are cherry picking the absolute best moments of their life, which doesn't happen all day, every day, right? Another thing is this individualism that we face here, deal with here in the United States, this pulling yourself up by the bootstraps mentality that we have, that promotes the idea that people must attain or aim for self-actualization in order to achieve true happiness. It tends to make us avoid difficult and painful emotions, rather than trying to solve them in the environment that led to the pain. Individualism teaches people that they are alone, that only them can handle and deal with their own problems. They are the only ones who should deal with their problems. But we know that's not true. What did the Zen Meister say? No man is an island, right? We're not made to do it alone. We're not made to do it alone. And the third one is religion and spirituality. All right, try to tread a little lightly over here with this one, but it can be particularly insidious. You've heard those comments before. Just pray about it. Just go to church. And my favorite, you need Jesus, right? But the truth is, there are situations and circumstances that you need more help than that. Just praying and going to church or tithing more is not going to solve that problem. You may need someone to work through the situation, work through the emotions. You may not be able to do it by yourself by just sitting there and praying. Sometimes you need help. Someone, perhaps a professional, who is detached from the situation, that can see clearly and can assist you in navigating these emotions and these feelings and everything that you're going through. Someone that doesn't necessarily have skin in the game, right? But sometimes we go to our pastors or our spiritual leaders, and they can be helpful. Spiritual counseling is wonderful. But they're not the qualified professionals in therapy. Sometimes you need more than just spiritual counseling, right? And some spiritual leaders and ministers understand that, and they will take you as far as they can, and then they will support you in finding that therapy that you need. Some don't. And that results in something I like to call, or has been termed, church hurt, right? Because they don't know how to handle this particular challenge that you're going through. And then their feelings get involved. Because what I say, because I know the Bible in and out, should help you. And if it's not, it's because there's something wrong with you. You're not doing it right. Right? That can happen. That can happen. So let's talk about now how this spiritual bypassing, what the impact is, what it can be. Spiritual bypassing isn't now always a bad thing. In times of severe distress, it can be a way of temporarily relieving frustration or anxiety. However, researchers suggest that it can be damaging when used as a long-term strategy to suppress problems. Spiritual bypassing can have a number of negative effects. It can affect an individual's well-being as well as relationships with others. And some of those potential negative consequences include denying difficult emotions. People often engage in spiritual bypassing when they think they should not be feeling what they are feeling. Negative emotions can be overwhelming at times. Feeling anger, jealousy, disgust, annoyance, and rage can be distressing, and people may find themselves feeling ashamed or guilty for feeling or thinking such things. And rather than dealing with negative feelings and any resulting reactions from those feelings, spiritual bypassing becomes a tool of avoidance. Those emotions and the feelings around them are important indicators of what's going on in you and some work that you may be doing, some past traumas that you have not dealt with. What is triggering that emotion in you? What's triggering that response? That's not a normal response for you. There's something that's coming up. And if we say, just be positive, just pray on it, just turn the other cheek, we're not necessarily dealing with what the root cause of that emotion or feeling is. Just as you shouldn't try to suppress your own negative emotions in order to avoid discomfort, you should also avoid the desire to save other people from emotions or situations that make you feel uncomfortable. Trying to save or shield others either from their circumstances or their own choices can also become a form of spiritual bypassing. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Shh, it's okay. Instead of being willing to sit in it with them. You don't even necessarily have to say anything. Just your practicing being in the presence with them is sometimes all they need. But they definitely don't need you saying, shh, be quiet, don't worry about it. It's gonna be okay. Just pray about it. Go to church more. Did you tithe this month? Dismissing other people's emotions. Spiritual bypassing can be a tool to dismiss what others are feeling. At times, spiritual bypassing can be used as a tool to gaslight others into staying silent about things that have harmed them. Rather than being allowed to express their pain, people who have been harmed are told by others that they are being a negative person. This tendency uses spirituality to reframe events in a way that lets people off the hook for the harm they may have caused. Again, you see this a lot in church hurt or family hurt, right? Oh, the pastor didn't mean anything by it. Oh, don't you say nothing bad about my pastor. They're human. We all have our shortcomings, make our mistakes, slip up, from time to time. We can't be afraid to be open to that possibility. And in family hurt, they know how to do it really well, don't they? They know how to do it really, really well. You know you have those family members, especially the older ones, who will come out the side of their neck with something. And what do we all say? Well, you know, that's how she is, you know. Or even, you know, as some of us who get older, it's like, well, you know, I'm old enough now, I can say whatever I want. Not that you're gonna hurt somebody unnecessarily. That's not a good thing. Another is avoiding responsibility. Spiritual bypassing also reduces the discomfort that people may feel as a result of cognitive dissonance, right? And that's holding two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time, two conflicting beliefs. For example, if you believe yourself to be a good person, you might struggle to take responsibility for hurtful things that you may have done. And we've all done it. Nobody's immune from that. Admitting that you have harmed someone else through your actions not only causes feelings of guilt, it also conflicts with your desire to see yourself in a positive light. In this way, spiritual bypassing becomes a way to shift the blame back onto the other person while absolving yourself of the responsibility. And there's judging others. Judging other people for expressing justifiable anger is a form of spiritual bypassing. Anger is a normal emotion and perfectly reasonable reaction to many events and situations in our lives. It means that there's something wrong and that action needs to be taken to fix a situation or mend a relationship. Authentic spirituality doesn't suppress valid emotions just because they're uncomfortable. Supporting them through the process of forgiveness is a way to not get into that spiritual bypassing. Because forgiveness is acknowledging that the past couldn't be any different, right? But that you're not to blame, and maybe even that person isn't to blame. There's circumstances and situations that we can move through. And what are those feelings? And what are their emotions? And why they're there? What can we talk to? What can we move through? And how can we be honest with each other? Right? As opposed to trying to suppress those feelings that we have. It's okay to feel difficult emotions. The key is dealing with them in a healthy way. And then finally, justifying suffering. Another example of spiritual bypassing is using supposed spiritual actions to justify not taking actions. Examples of this include saying things such as, "It's that way for a reason. It says nature or God intended." Or, "It is what it is." It lets people off the hook for taking any responsibility because according to such explanation, these things are natural, unchangeable, divinely caused. Such explanations make it easy to just accept things that they are and not focus on steps that we can take to make a difference. Now, some situations may be outside of our control, or we may face obstacles that make change difficult, but it is important to acknowledge and accept the responsibility for what we can do to make a situation better. Remember, taking responsibility does not mean taking blame. Taking responsibility for how you choose to respond to the situation is what you're doing. Bypassing also becomes a form of victim blaming, especially in cases where people are experiencing negative effects of various kinds of trauma. Telling people that they should just stop being negative in order to avoid exhaustion, anxiety, depression, or other physical and psychological manifestations of stress is essentially telling them that they are to blame for their own pain and suffering. This is why spiritual bypassing can sometimes be so subtle and difficult to spot in yourself and in others. See, meditation can be a helpful way to deal with stress that will help you cope with conflict. Visiting meaningful places can give you a connection to your community. Praying can give you a sense of peace and comfort when confronting an uncomfortable truth. The difference lies in the intention behind those actions. Are they a way of making you feel spiritually superior to others? Then they're like functioning largely as a spiritual bypass, preventing true growth. So how does it happen? How can this thing happen for us? This spiritual bypassing. Well, I wanted to share something with you. Have any of you watched this show on the Smithsonian Channel? It's one of my guilty pleasures. It's called Air Disasters. So it's a show, they talk about all the huge, airplane issues, crashes, near misses, or what have you that have happened, throughout the years. But one of the things that I like about it is when they are doing the accident investigation, they don't stop at the initial cause. So this part may have fallen off the airplane, right? They don't stop there, right? They take a step back. Well, why could it have even fell off the airplane? What was going on? Was it built wrong? Was it maintained properly? Okay, so it wasn't maintained properly. Let's take a step back. Okay, so let's look. What was the schedule of maintenance? Is it the proper way to maintain that item? When they have to maintain it, how do they feel? Are they doing it in the best way? What's going on? And they continue to take a step back and take a step back. They are peeling back the layers. They're not stopping at the surface of what the issue is. They're constantly going further and further to find out the root cause. And often they find out it's more than one thing. It may not just be something that mechanical that happened on the plane. There may be something with how the plane was operated, how the pilots were operating the plane. Right? Well, they saw, even if it fell off, they could have still have landed on time because they got the little signal that says something's wrong. They could have turned around. Well, could they? Was that signal in their line of sight that they could see it? Or was there 5 other buttons buzzing at the same time that they couldn't tell which one they needed to push? So do we need to go back and redesign this panel on? So it's peeling back the layers and not stopping at the surface to find out what the root cause. That is what happens with spiritual bypassing. We stop at the root cause. We stop at the surface level, right? Like for instance, okay, I'm stressed. That conversation just pissed me off. She knows how to push my buttons all the time, and I can't believe I let her do that. Okay, I'm gonna meditate. And you meditate. And you feel calm. It's worked. And you say, okay, good, I'm fine. But you still haven't resolved the issue, right? You haven't figured out why that conversation got under your skin, why that happened. What is the root cause? Take a step back. Right? Meditation is more than just calming you down. It allows for clarity so that you can understand and see what the root cause may be. So that's how it can happen. While spiritual bypassing may be less harmful than some other coping mechanisms, it can still lead to negative outcomes that hurt an individual's ability to grow as a person and fulfill their potential. It can stifle emotional development and even stand in the way of fully realizing yourself spiritually. Spiritual bypassing can also sometimes involve participating in spiritual activities in order to feel superior or to get around having to take any meaningful action. Instead of talking about a conflict, you'll meditate. Instead of participating in your community, you'll just visit a temple or a church. Instead of confronting your discomfort, you'll just recite a prayer. The problem does not lie in engaging these spiritual practices. The problem is that you're using them as a shield to make yourself feel better, not for truly spiritual reasons. We need to remember that spiritual practice and emotional growth are not about achieving a particular quality or feeling good. See, there is something very necessary about being and about being authentically you. Now, understand this may feel like a tall order sometimes. If you become present to who you are, to the allness of who you are, there is a lot there sometimes that you don't want to see. For most people, this consists of things like shame and anger, anxiety, loneliness, self-loathing, our dark side, and that list can go on and on. None of us really want to deal with all that. But the more that we try to rise above it or turn your back to it, the more it has lingered there, waiting, almost growing in size. Eventually, you're going to have to turn around and face it. And the most amazing thing happens and continues to happen when you do. it doesn't swallow you whole. In fact, recognizing those dark sides that are there could finally help you to experience what is on the light side. Once you take responsibility for stuff, there are real fruits of spiritual and psychological development. We stop running from ourselves and start loving ourselves. So let me share with you my experience of spiritual bypassing. A few years ago, I moved out from my roommates. These are roommates I had for a long time. Love these people. They're absolutely wonderful. We had been friends and business partners and roommates for a long, long time. But it was just time for me to move into the next phase of my life. And that year, I called it my year of courage. Courageous enough to step out on my own and handle my own stuff. Courageous enough that I even went skydiving and I took some of you with me, right? And then so I moved. I made that move and was in my own place and doing my own thing. And aren't you supposed to be happy? Aren't you just supposed to be excited now that you're moving into this new phase? I'm doing my own thing. I don't have to consider anybody else. I can walk around my house naked if I want to. Right? But I wasn't. And it took me a while to figure that out because I was doing all these spiritual practices that were supposed to help me, right? Because I did all this stuff to get me to this point, right? To help me build the courage, right? To move into this new phase. So these things should just work, right? And why is it not working? Why am I not happy? Why am I not now doing all these things that I have time to do now, right? Because I have all the time to myself. I'm sitting there not happy, not motivated. It wasn't until I talked to some of my friends, talked to some people, and got some help, and actually sat down in my meditation and really sat down in my meditation to gain clarity, to be okay with not knowing the answers, to be okay with not being Reverend Drea, right? Just being me, having my own challenges, and being okay with seeing what they are, being with them, sitting with them, moving through them, and getting help for them. Spiritual bypassing. Healthy expressions of spirituality help you grow as a person, while bypassing creates a barrier between you and your authentic growth. Reminds me of this quote by John Momberket. Without deep and honest self-acceptance, the spiritual life rests on a dangerous psychological foundation and is nothing more than escape into a world of illusion. Humble self-knowledge is the most basic condition for any true spirituality. So with that being said, we're going to talk about some ways of recognizing and avoiding spiritual bypassing. So we're going to cultivate an open mind, that type of attitude. Before uncovering any forms of spiritual bypassing that you have wielded their way into your life, you need to be open. You need to be willing to be wrong, misguided, or totally off the mark. Without that willingness, you're fooling yourself. There's no point in even trying to call yourself out because you're shooting yourself in both feet before you even begin. So cultivate an open-minded and willing attitude. Remind yourself that it's okay to be imperfect, because we all are. Most spiritual seekers, in fact, I dare to say all, go through and do wrong at some point. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. Embrace your flawed humanity and take a step toward greater expansion. The next is examine the light and dark side of what you do. There is a light and dark side to everything. Even if you struggle to find what's wrong with the spiritual activities or commitments you're dedicated to right now. Create hypothetical situations or scenarios. For example, if you follow a spiritual teacher that you love and adore, create a hypothetical scenario where the teacher betrays your trust or does something against your ethics. What then? Ask yourself how you would deal with that, how you can handle that. Listening to your doubt and your inner self is intelligent. Blind faith creates sheep, not a self-sovereign wolf. Dare to look at both sides of life. Honor the yin and the yang of existence. Embrace the energy of it all. Number 3, dare to face your cognitive dissonance. Right? What are those beliefs, those conflicting beliefs that you have? The result of that is an underlying uneasiness when we don't deal with it. When we have that and we don't deal with it, there's anxiety, there's guilt. Something isn't quite right in what we're experiencing and what we're feeling. Those who carry a lot of cognitive dissonance tend to explain away their behavior and live in denial. Facing the truth is too painful, so reality is avoided, and false reality is created instead. Number 4, ask others for their honest opinions. If you have any close friends or family members who you have a healthy and respectful relationship with, talk to them about this topic. Ask them if they have noticed any spiritual bypassing tendencies within you. Brace yourself and your ego by taking a slow, soft, deep breath for their response. Now, if there are times that you feel overwhelmed and you get angry or defensive, thank them. Take a breath and take a break. It's a process. Something that we all have to go through. I have a friend who is just like that. And she wants my opinion about something and it's not necessarily favorable. And I am very honest with her. I know when she's done. And she said, okay, I'll call you back. And I'll say it's okay. And I'm okay with it because I understand she's processing, but she will come back. When she's done processing, she'll come back and we could talk through that. She's very self-aware. Love it. And then face and feel your pain. Spiritual bypassing occurs when we avoid facing painful emotions such as grief, shame, rage, hatred, terror. Everyone wants to enjoy that sparkly high of life, but no one wants to do the hard work of facing inner pain. But doing that leads to long-lasting joy and fulfillment and peace. Facing and feeling your pain is not simple. You will most likely require the help of a spiritual counselor or a therapist. And ideally, they will be trauma-informed so they can assist you in those repressed pains stemming from unresolved trauma. It's not a fun prospect for most people to think about having to do that. Hence why the avoidance happens. But the fact still remains. The pain needs to be dealt with sooner or later. So to conclude, I will leave you with this beautiful spiritual bypassing quote by psychologist and author Elaine N. Aron. Real redemption or enlightenment, as much as it can be achieved in this world, comes through hard work that does not skirt tough personal issues. And so it is.
I love you.